Chapter 6. Zelda walked through the long corridors of Hyrule Castle, admiring several of her favorite paintings of past monarchs as she went along. She could see the resemblances between the family members she'd met, cousins who looked like grandparents, queens who looked like their ancestors. There was one particular image that Zelda was always drawn to, a painting that was so faded, considered one of the oldest relics in all of Hyrule, preserved and restored as best as possible through Sheikah technology. It was of a blonde female in a white dress, the one for whom they'd originally modeled the traditional white prayer gowns after. Many believed this was a portrait of the goddess herself, but Zelda feared that answer. In truth, in its blurred and aged state, it looked exactly like her. Finally, Zelda reached the portrait of her mother, beautiful and young and alive. It was from the day of her parents' coronation, and her father stood proudly behind her with a smaller crown on his head as they posed in expensive, heavy robes that one day Zelda would have to wear. She and her mother looked similar, and her father often joked that he thanked the goddess every day that Zelda hadn't inherited his nose. Her hand instinctively reached up to brush against the canvas, but she pulled back when she remembered there wasn't glass there, and her fingers would simply stain it. Her memories of her mother had long since blurred, and the young, smiling face in her mind was a reflection of paintings throughout the castle rather than true memories. Her voice was something Zelda made up during sleepless nights, because no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't call up the memories of that soothing sound. Since the death of her mother, her father guarded Zelda more closely, to the point that it had become stifling, and they'd had nights screaming at each other just for the right to go outside into Hyrule Field. She knew it was out of love and protection, but goddess, it was suffocating. Would her mother have done the same to her if her father had been the one who died? She'd never known her well enough to make a guess about that. After the several attacks she'd faced, she wasn't surprised by his concern, especially given how her mother had died. Her mother, also named Zelda, had gone with her young Zelda out into Hyrule Field to pick flowers together. Her mother had placed several once abundant silent princesses into Zelda's hair like a crown, just before a plume of smoke appeared, and they were both set upon. Zelda didn't remember much. She was too young. She could only vividly remember being picked up by one of their guards, screaming that she wanted her mother, and then never seeing her again. Everything else had been feelings that were shut tight and only burst free from her when she was most afraid, calling back to the utter terror that had encapsulated her little body. Something about that had grown with her, and the Yiga left as much a mark on her soul as they had her family and the kingdom itself. The path for the funeral procession was strewn with silent princesses, and not long after, the precious flowers began to die out across Hyrule, like it had been Zelda's mother's magic that had sustained them, and without it, the flowers struggled to thrive on their own. While the guard had saved Zelda's life on that fateful day, she occasionally resented the stranger, wishing that he'd stayed to save the queen with the other guards who failed. She was a child. She loved to run around. She loved to play hide-and-seek. Perhaps she could have survived on her own. Perhaps that guard could have made the difference between her mother being killed or not. Sometimes she resented him for getting her to safety. Maybe, just maybe, if she'd stayed there with her mom, her powers would have unlocked and she could have saved them all. The latest attack from the Yiga had nearly thrown her from a bridge to her death, but it was only the most recent of a string of attempts on her life since that day. She recalled many in the year that the calamity was portended to occur. The one that still gave her nightmares had been when she'd been studying the Guardians at Purah and Robbie's lab, and she'd found herself pushed back into the grass with a curved blade against her throat, and a Yiga shoved her down with ease, only saved at the last second when Purah adjusted a nearby Guardian, and prayed that it didn't strike Zelda by accident when she commanded it to fire. It had been a literal shot in the dark, and Zelda could still feel the breeze against her face, the cool heat that shouldn't exist as it passed right above her nose. Shuddering, she wondered what her mother would have made of that. What would she have done? Her mother could have saved her, she was sure. Looking down the hall, away from the portraits that did little but remind her of a life she'd never live, Zelda could see her escorts, who, given the late afternoon hour, were simply 3 of her ladies rather than knights. They were talking amongst themselves, always giving Zelda enough space that she could forget they were there, though most of the time, Zelda wished to be included in their conversations. Whenever she got too close, though, they defaulted to courtesy and silence, and all conversation stopped. They were close friends with each other, but distantly polite and courteous to her. Would they be able to help her if there was a Yiga attack right now? Would she be able to help herself? Picking up the long skirts of her dress, she hurried down the spiraling stairway to get into a more populated area of the castle, wishing that the thought of the Yiga didn't frighten her as much as they did, especially while she was in her own home. There was a hard thudding in her chest at the thought that they could be around, as unlikely as it was that they were in the castle while surrounded by so many knights. Link had reminded her again and again that they were out there to kill her. And while she knew that, she hated remembering that the threat wasn't as distant as she liked to pretend it was. She needed air, and stepped into the orange glow of the setting sun, shielding her eyes from the glare. Behind her, she could hear her lady struggling to keep pace with her. Her feet carried her to the gardens, which were patrolled, lit, and peaceful. She needed all of that right now. Her favorite spot was in the center by a large fountain. It had benches, a view of some of the more pristine hedges and rose bushes, and it was alight with torches each night. Plus, with the near full moon, the entire area would be well lit. The sound of the water was peaceful, and she'd fallen asleep by it more than once. However, when she and her ladies arrived, she could see that the seat at the fountain had already been occupied. 3 soldiers were sitting by the bench, long spears in hand, armor ready. Good to know what her guards did when they thought no one was looking. They were all laughing, 2 of them trying to push the third off the ledge they were sitting on and into the water, despite his resistance. There were teasing jokes aimed at the one they were trying to knock over. Nothing she could hear in any detail, but enough for her to understand that there was no malice in their apparent assault, especially in the way that he seemed to be able to give it right back. She crept closer, making her way around the front of them. She had no intention of bothering them. In fact, once she'd seen them there, she intended to veer far from her initial intent to sit at the fountain, to instead go into the hedge maze and find her favorite garden flower that grew in the more secluded shady areas to tend to some potentially dead leaves. But she did stop, because the soldier they were trying to push into the water was Link. Suddenly, she remembered with keen intrigue that he was most often stationed here in the gardens when he wasn't out in Hyrule Field or at her door, and the thought did dawn on her that maybe, just maybe, she hadn't intended to visit the fountain at all, but to subconsciously seek out Link in a moment she needed to feel safe. That frightened her. She wasn't used to leaning on others for support when she felt too weak to stand on her own. She had always been her own pillar, and no matter the cracks in her foundation, she'd always been expected to stand tall. The feeling of having someone she trusted implicitly was new as well. She trusted all her guards, sure. She had favorites before, especially any she spent a significant amount of time with. But Link had bypassed favoritism and gone straight to the center. There wasn't one specific thing she could put her finger on, but if she needed to call for one other person in the entire world to stand beside her in a moment of need, she'd choose him. Not her father, not even the thought of her mother could have taken that place. No champions, Sheikah, nor Urbosa. It was Link, and she didn't quite know why. Had the past several months endeared him to her so thoroughly? She tried not to laugh as he gripped one of the other soldiers' gauntlets for balance, his legs contorted to try to brace himself against the stone, frankly using his calves as his primary source of strength and balance at this point. He'd discarded his spear in an effort to keep himself upright, so it was at his feet, and he was laughing. She didn't know he laughed that hard with the others. Was it strange to feel a pang of jealousy for such a trivial thing as friends of his making him laugh? She wanted to be the one making him laugh. It was only when the two assailants noticed her that they stopped, nearly dropping Link straight into the water simply out of shock rather than with purpose, and they bowed. It gave Link the chance to get himself upright. When he spotted the reason they'd stopped assaulting him, he smiled and bent his head.
Princess Zelda.
Her lips tilted up at the sight of him smiling at her. It was an instinctual reaction on her part, some innate joy at seeing him happy.
I didn't realize you still knew how to bow to me. You do it so infrequently.
His smirk grew wider.
We're on your turf right now, not mine.
There were looks of surprise and hushed whispers from Zelda's ladies and Link's friends at their playful teasing. Link, a common, unimportant soldier teasing the Princess of Hyrule? Talking back to her playfully? Goddess the shock. She looked him over, feeling a frustratingly warm sensation rush over her as she admired the guard's metal armor on him. His hair was tied back, like usual, but except for the day he'd sparred with Coil, she'd always only ever seen him in just a shirt and chainmail, or entirely comfortable clothes to train in. He was one of the more unassuming knights, but with him decked out in his full Royal Guard regalia, he would have looked a bit intimidating if not for the dopey grin on his face as he stared at her. She was thankful for the orange lighting, as she blushed for admiring him too long.
Is your patrol route not considered your turf?
You can command me to do as you wish, Princess. I can only do that in the training yard.
Command?
She playfully raised an eyebrow.
Well, strongly advised for the sake of training and safety, Majesty.
Yes, that's much better.
She had laughed, but she could feel the heat of the other's stares on her and Link. So, she turned to the other guards, a light-hearted grin on her face, hoping and praying that there was no red in her cheeks.
By all means, continue whatever it was you were doing to Link.
You'd like that, huh?
Instant satisfaction at seeing you fall into a giant fountain of water? Yes, absolutely.
The other guards and Zelda's ladies had now gone quiet to listen to their rather informal conversation and watched them with unbridled curiosity as it continued beyond one initial brief passing exchange. Perhaps Link felt that too, because he stood up and grabbed his spear off the ground before brushing himself off.
Is there anything I can help you with, Princess? Or are you out here to enjoy the gardens?
She hesitated, pointing toward the shrubbery without a verbal answer for a long time. A thought dawned on her.
The gardens. But actually, since you're here, would you accompany me for a moment? I have a favor to ask of you. Though, truly, that wasn't my original intent for being here.
Of course, Princess.
He waited until she was several paces in front of him before following her, where she led him away from the others and towards the maze. To her, it was no longer a maze per se, because she knew every path well, as she imagined Link did at this point too. After a few moments of prolonged silence, Link playfully asked the inevitable question.
What favor can I bestow upon thee, my liege?
The hedges weren't too wide, and Zelda might have been standing closer to Link than she needed to, especially since she was the one who closed the gap he had made between them with his protocol distance. Maybe it was the past few days of training so close to each other that led her to boldly stand toe-to-toe with him.
Okay. I want to ask for something that will sound a bit strange out of context. I was thinking of a past incident with the Eager.
She stopped for a time, so Link moved a little closer to her, decorum falling away into their usual back-and-forth conversational style. He was curious, and it lit up his eyes.
Go on.
Right. Well, I was once attacked by the Eager at Purah and Robbie's lab, and Purah recalibrated the Guardian she'd been working on rather quickly to save me. But given the training we've been doing, it had me thinking. I'd like to practice doing something specific. No, I can't phrase it like that. I want to be... no. Link, don't laugh. But I was wondering if you just sort of...
She covered her face, unable to find a way to phrase her request without it sounding unintentionally untoward. And given her and Link's inability to refrain from turning an innocent comment into something it was not meant to be intended as, she struggled for the words.
I'm so intrigued, Princess. You can't just stop there.
He watched with a smile as her face reddened by the second. He leaned against his spear, his blue eyes intense on hers. No other guard would dare look at her like that. It wasn't helping. She took a deep breath and kept her own eyes on a particularly perfect flower as a distraction so she could get through her request.
You've said that the Yiga can easily kill me once I'm pinned to the ground, that there's really no hope at that point. Well, I've been there before, and I'd very nearly died. So, I don't want to die. Do you understand?
Link's brows furrowed, and he shook his head.
I don't know. Unless you're asking me to pin you to the ground during training, then yes, I do.
Well, I would not have phrased it quite like that, but essentially, yes. But only so I know how to knock you off of me.
She fidgeted with the fabric of her dress, and Link blessedly recognized that she wasn't done speaking and kept his obnoxiously loud thoughts inside his mind for now, though she could already see them teasing his eyes.
Link, the thing is, I don't want my guards watching us like they normally do, or the potential for my father to come by. It's awkward enough when they're there just staring at us while you have yourself all but wrapped around me. But it would be far worse in such a
compromising position?
Shut up.
He smiled.
This sounds more illicit as you give me more details. And you're making our current training sound much more fun than it is. But if that's what you want, I'm happy to change things up. Better than you asking for a sword again, anyway.
Nerves seeped out of her in a laugh of her own, pushing her hair away from her face just so she could fiddle with something.
This needs to stay private. Could we practice in the gardens?
Goddess, no.
After quickly looking around, he led her further into the maze, away from any other possible ears that may hear a conversation that, out of context, would start to sound a fair bit scandalous.
There are patrols, and I'd have to remove all this armor so I don't hurt you, because it's surprisingly heavy and occasionally sharp. Imagine walking in on that scene. You struggling beneath me with all this armor discarded off to the side. I'd be flat out murdered, no matter what you would say to defend me. As a knight of Hyrule, I'd gladly die for you. But if it's avoidable, I'd rather live.
She winced, forgetting that outside the training yard, the appearance of any of their practice would look vastly different to an outsider.
Goddess, I'm sorry. I didn't think of it like that.
Well, don't apologize, Princess. Let's think. There's the spring beneath the castle. Deserted, open, and extremely cold, unfortunately, but just work up a sweat and we'd be okay.
Shivering simply thinking of it, her head was already shaking. It was bone-chillingly freezing down there, and was only used for the sake of its hot springs, which often weren't worth the effort. And the thought of her and Link alone in there? Well, it wasn't bringing the most innocent thoughts to mind. Besides, it was still a public place, and with their luck, some maid and guard would sneak down there for a rendezvous and stumble upon Princess and Knight tumbling around the dirty stone ground.
No, we're not going there. I wish we could just go to my rooms. They're so spacious. But if you're there, the guards will move to the door, and it'll have to be a rather silent practice so they don't think anything is wrong, come inside the room, and proceed to murder you for the same scenario once again.
Yes. And if there's anything these months of training have taught us, it's that you are incredibly vocal.
I beg your pardon? I'm what?
She gave the knight an incredulous look on her pink face. He bit his lip, fighting back a laugh. A nervous one, mixed with genuine humor at her expression, read and embarrassed by the potential other meanings that might have been read as. He thanked the goddess that they'd developed enough of a friendship that she didn't immediately take him to her father for such a comment. They had developed a friendship. The look on her face wasn't angry, so, with his heart in his throat, ready to die on the spot if he was terribly wrong about her, he forced out a nervous grin.
That was a slip. I meant to say that you are incredibly beautiful. Sorry.
She hit him in the arm.
That's not any better.
Nerves washed away in an instant when he took in her expression. It wasn't disgust, horror, offense, or anything negative. There was a slight upturn at the corner of her mouth that made Link want to kiss her with relief. Well...
I hate you.
Despite her claim, she grabbed his arm to move him deeper into the maze, her hands around his armor so he couldn't feel her against him, to his unruly dismay. He looked around the area she'd brought him to, and found his eyes trailing down her body, over the curves of her dress, and lingering too obviously on the small drop of her neckline.
Hey!
She snapped her fingers to get his attention.
Why are you constantly ogling me like that?
Smirking, he leaned into her.
Because you're beautiful, remember?
She scoffed and pushed his arm away, as much as she wanted to tug him closer. With a laugh, he gestured to her dress.
As usual, I'm not actually looking at you in that way.
But really, he was.
I'm assessing what you're wearing. You don't want to train in that dress.
I have shorts on underneath.
Shorts? Why?
I'm sorry. Are you disappointed?
Zelda huffed and turned away from him. Goddess above, he needed to learn to control himself in private with her. He felt far too much freedom whenever they were completely alone.
No, gods no. I'm just confused. Why would you?
Clearly you've never worn a dress, let alone in the wind, in a crowd, or in any position where you might have a slight wardrobe malfunction.
You don't know what I do in my spare time.
He cursed himself once for speaking again, and a second curse for enjoying the smile spreading on her lips far more than he should. She glanced down the small path that led to where they were, and when satisfied that they were alone, she pulled her skirt to her knee and then up a bit slower until her tight black shorts were in view, proving her statement. She watched his eyes follow every move with rapt attention and parted lips. Her smug grin grew, and she quickly dropped the fabric before lightly running her finger under Link's chin, her fingertip tickling the finest of hairs that were scattered across his jaw.
I knew you were drooling! Think that goddess today wasn't the day I wore my stockings and garter. You'd be dead.
His eyes snapped to hers, too dumbfounded to speak. It took him several long moments to compose himself and to get the image of her bare leg out of his mind for more than 2 seconds. And she'd done it on purpose.
You're dangerous to be around. I believed you without the proof, thank you.
At least I don't drool over the princess. I can control myself when I'm around others.
Yes, well, I don't know what you do when you're alone.
Zelda froze for a moment before grabbing Link's shoulders and pushing him back the way they'd come in.
That's it. I am not speaking to you anymore today.
I'm sorry.
He turned to stop her from walking. His hands were on her hips, too familiar and comfortable. At the realization, he let them fall.
You're too easy to talk to sometimes. I forget who you are. Sometimes. What was the initial question?
Crossing her arms, Zelda turned her attention to one of the flowers. Pink roses, soft petals, vicious thorns. Her expression dropped immediately, and Link felt the shift in the air from playful to serious. He put his hand on her arm in support, waiting. The ease with which they could switch to something serious had Zelda feeling trusting of him, more than usual.
I'll only ever tell you this right now, and then I'll probably never voice this again. But I'm really, truly, genuinely terrified, Link. The Yiga. I'm more afraid of them than I am of Ganon, or of the whole calamity. I'm kept awake by the thought that one day I'll be asleep, and I won't wake up in time. That one of them will crawl on top of me and strangle me to death. Or that I'd be enjoying the view of Lake Hylia, and suddenly there's a knife through my back. I'll always pretend that I'm not afraid of them, because that's how I get by. But sometimes I'm so afraid to take a breath. What if they puncture my lung and that's my last one? If I relax in the bath, would they take advantage of my inattentiveness and I won't wake? They're in my nightmares. They haunt my days, and I'm terrified. I hate this feeling so much, Link. I just want to feel safe. And I don't.
Link could see a teardrop start to leave her eye, but she quickly wiped it away.
Hey.
He tugged her arm lightly, bringing her towards him.
That won't happen.
It might.
Not if I'm around. Not if your other guards are. And soon, they won't dare attack you alone, because you are frightening when you want to be.
He watched her eyes to see if he'd gotten the smallest reaction. It was there, a brief twitch of her lips, but it wasn't enough.
Come here.
She looked at him questioningly for a moment before stepping closer into his arms. Link gave her another tug, his hands uncertain, just barely brushing over her elbows with the slightest pressure in an attempt to tell her what he was trying to do. She gave him an odd look, and he relented to moving his hands to her waist. It was enough for her to understand his intention, and she shifted around to try to get comfortable against his armor. She brought her hands between them to cushion herself against the metal, resting them on Link's chest and keeping her cheek off the awkward bend in the plate's shoulder. But eventually she found a place to settle, and she dipped her head to nuzzle her face into her hands, letting her eyes close to stop the burn they felt. But just being this close to someone else, to Link, was helping ease the pressure of it all. Link wasn't sure he'd recovered from the last time they'd hugged when he brought her to the abandoned house. His hands were slightly steadier this time, or at the very least, less uncertain, but he still didn't know what to actually do with them. He wanted to pull her by the waist, to press her against him until there was no room for anything else. He wanted to stroke her hair, to let her feel an outside distraction so she'd forget the fears in her mind. He wanted to run his hands up and down her arms. But friends don't do those things, do they? He didn't know, honestly. He decided to do absolutely none of those things. Instead, he went somewhere in the middle, still holding her close but keeping his hands light against her back. It felt safe enough to make her feel safe.
I understand a little.
He spoke low in her ear. They were close enough that they could whisper if they wanted.
It's not nearly the same situation for me, but I understand to an extent. The Yiga killed my brother several years ago and injured my father. And I've never been able to fight them the same since then. I won't let anyone I love die because of them. Not again. I threw myself into training and work so I would be the very best at what I do. So it would never happen to anyone I care about again. So, I know some of the fear you're talking about. They frighten me too.
You had a brother?
She could feel his head nod, but she could tell that was the end of it, and he wasn't planning to elaborate. So she slid out of his grasp and let her hand run down the inside of his arm, one of the few places she knew the armor didn't cover thanks to the straps.
Thank you for sharing. I needed that. To feel that I'm not alone.
The wind moved her dress as she turned to leave, and Link shook his head, debating just how much trouble he was willing to risk getting in for her. Truthfully, a lot.
Princess, wait. Does your father still bid you a good night?
He hasn't in some time. Why?
After the shift change, I'll meet you in your room.
Link, I already said the guards will go to the door when you...
Just have a little faith in me, Princess. I know what to do.
Crossing her arms, Zelda sighed.
Okay, I will put in a little faith. But are you going to make any more inappropriate jokes?
Possibly. Unless you make them first.
Zelda sat at the table in the massive dining hall. It was a rare occasion that her father was able to join her. One of his advisors had gotten sick, and a meeting had been postponed. He sat at the head of the table, and Zelda sat on his right. It was tense with unfamiliarity. Though they were on good terms, they rarely did this. Eating together had essentially become them eating alone in the same room. It was only when the plates were cleared away that Rome leaned against the table, manners that were only acceptable around family, and examined Zelda.
You look tired. Are you okay?
Quite. Thank you for asking.
Link's not running you into the ground, right?
No, not at all. I asked for him to challenge me more. I'm just feeling it.
Rome nodded, resting his chin in his hand.
I spoke with Coyle. He says you and Link are getting on much better than you were at the beginning. Is that true?
Zelda wished there was food in front of her to occupy herself, but there was nothing. Even her glass was empty.
Yes, it's true. We've become friends, I think.
Friends? Good. I was a little concerned when I saw just how forward he was with you when I visited you last. Tell me the truth, Zelda, and I'll take care of it immediately. Are you uncomfortable with him?
Her brows shot up.
No! Goddess, no! I mean, thank you for being concerned and willing to help, but no. I gave Link permission to speak and act freely around me. It makes me feel like we're on equal terms. There's always an imbalance with us. I'm his superior as princess. He's my superior as trainer. So, meeting in the middle in everyday interactions is quite comforting. I'm very happy. He doesn't make me uncomfortable at all.
Rome took a sip of his wine.
Then why are you red?
Goddess. There was nothing for her to grab. Nothing to fiddle and fidget with. Unable to do anything else, she tried to use her practiced political ease as best she could.
Because you just offered to take my guard away. I got nervous.
Setting his goblet down, Rome nodded.
Just remember who you are, Zelda. You're an adult. I won't begrudge you a crush, but see to it that it stays at just that, or I will have to have Link reassigned. You have a duty to Hyrule, as a priestess of the goddess, as heir to Hylia, and as princess of Hyrule. I had my fun when I was young, and then your mother and I did our duties, and we found great love and happiness in that bond.
Goddess, Father! I'm not forsaking my duties. I'm doing what you asked of me, and I'm doing it thoroughly. And frankly, not to sound terribly rude, but I don't want to hear about my parents' love lives.
Love life? Is that an admission?
Stop!
She finally felt a taut bubble burst inside her, relieving the tension. He was teasing her now, and she never minded that. Still, their conversation made her wary, and the proposition she'd put to Link now felt even more illicit than it had before. There was no way Rome could find out about this. After dinner, Zelda returned to her room and proceeded to set herself to her studies. She sat on her bed with a book on Hylian geography. It was a tedious task, since, for the most part, this was not new information to her. She'd vigorously studied the topography of the land she'd one day rule. She knew trade routes, unused paths, villages, even some trails on mountain ranges. But she still didn't know who lived in that house Link had brought her to, even after all this time. Link. She glanced at the door, only the first of several quick checks to see if he would just stroll in. Poring through the book was a fun way to keep her thoughts occupied on something that didn't involve prayer or fighting or politics. Plus, it put to good use an otherwise boring book she'd already gone through before to learn the lay of Hyrule. She was getting close, though. She'd at least confirmed that her years were about accurate. Given the setup of Hyrule 300 years ago, it was likely a nobleman's home, which she'd already assumed just from the size alone. Glancing at the door once again, distracted for the umpteenth time, she waited for the inevitable knock from Link. Of course he wouldn't just stroll in. He'd knock. The guard change had been about 30 minutes ago, so she knew that his shift in the gardens would be done by now. And if he'd hoped to sneak past the soldiers who patrolled her floor, he was mistaken, because they were the most vigorous at the beginning of their shift and laxer throughout the night. He wasn't planning to sneak into her room in the dead of night, right? Setting the book aside, she rolled out of bed and sat at her mirror, retying her hair out of her face in sheer boredom. She was dressed in training clothes, only slightly more comfortable than the ones she wasn't afraid to get dirty in the training yard. These were softer, at least. She didn't know what to do with herself, standing up to wander around her bedroom. There was a sitting room that she could occupy, one that was big and had a couch and a fireplace. While she wasn't interested in resting there, she went through the door and warmed her hands for a while, staring in the direction of her hall, straining her ears to listen to the sound of passing footsteps that didn't stop until they were out of earshot. Stretching her arms above her head, she grabbed a more frivolous book off her shelf. one that was more self-indulgent rather than educational, and brought it back to her room so she could lie in bed and read. But when she returned, there was a piece of paper on her bed that had her setting the book down so she could hold up the note. It was on her own stationery from her desk.
I'm here. But where? Lesson 1. Don't let yourself be caught by surprise. L.
Rolling her eyes, Zelda folded the note and set it back down, checking beneath the hollow space of her desk before looking around the rest of her very empty room.
I asked for your help with a very specific task, not a full-blown lesson on stealth.
Her voice was loud, unsure of where he was. Hoping to hear him chuckle, she was disappointed when she was met with silence, so she began to walk around her room, checking in the closets and in every alcove he could have hidden in.
I hope you're enjoying this, because I'm not.
She dropped to her knees and checked under her bed before shuddering and looking at the ceiling, hoping to the goddess that he wasn't somehow up there, because at this point, she wouldn't put it past him. Maybe he'd gone to her study? Pushing herself off the ground, she turned for the door that led outside, and let out a short, soft squeak of surprise, her hand covering her mouth to stifle any other noise. Link was leaning casually outside her window, watching her with amused eyes, perking up when he realized she'd finally seen him. Zelda hurried to the window and pulled the pane open that he'd somehow managed to shut from the outside.
You're on my roof.
His grin was visible underneath a piece of fabric that covered his mouth.
You're exceptionally unobservant, Princess.
She dragged him inside by the arm, subconsciously noticing that he was dressed differently, but too preoccupied with locking her window to care, until she turned around. Oh, goddess, she thought, gratuitously taking him in. She knew that some of her more elite guards had trained with the Sheikah. She knew that the Sheikah were masters of stealth. She'd even seen Impa in the tight outfit that their warriors wore, perfectly soundless, unencumbered, armorless. It was silent and deadly. On Impa, Zelda had been impressed and intrigued. But Link was wearing it now, the dark blue, skin-tight material clinging to him, leaving so little to the imagination. She was beyond grateful that there was a piece that didn't seem to be attached to the bodysuit, preventing her eyes from drifting too low on the tight material, though she was still blessed with a perfect imprint of his muscled abdomen pressing against the fabric. She knew she was right to assume that, despite his unintimidating appearance, he was hiding well-defined, carefully cultivated muscles beneath his usually loose tunic.
Are you going to be playing the part of the eager?
She remembered asking him once while training with Coil. He'd smirked at her.
I could, but I don't have the right clothing set out for that. It's much tighter to allow for better movement and stealth.
And there he was in that outfit.
Now who's drooling?
It was clear he had noticed her long, indulgent look. He pulled down a piece of fabric that helped keep his face hidden. The reveal of his face was perhaps a moment of pity for her, because lowering the fabric meant exposing the dark red that had crept up his neck and threatened to choke him when she looked at him like that. Zelda managed to scoff, but it was half-hearted and had little effort put into it, especially since she didn't look away from him, making Link chuckle to himself.
You said not to alert the guards. I didn't want to be seen.
You climbed up the roof.
It wasn't a question, but a belated realization.
I did.
She gave him another gratuitous look over, impressed, intrigued, and distracted.
And then you wonder why someone might be physically attracted to you. Though anything else beyond that eludes me.
The playfulness in her voice kept all malice away, and the fact that she was even able to maintain her composure about this whole situation made him turn redder than the Yiga uniforms. He stalked off to the side of the room, so she couldn't see him as flushed as he was.
So you admit it?
Though he was still joking with her, his voice was soft and shyer than he'd intended. Zelda fixed her hair and sat on her bed, looking every bit as regal as if she were in a dress on her throne than in training clothes on an unmade bed.
I'd embarrass myself more by trying to lie after shamelessly ogling you. So, yes.
Well, I will admit, and with great fear of retribution, Princess, that the feeling is mutual.
He chuckled nervously and pulled at the hair on the back of his neck.
Yes, I'm quite aware.
Zelda started to giggle, short bubbles of laughter that she couldn't stop, even if they were making her sound unhinged, which she felt at that moment.
Well, with that out of the way, I'd like to remind you that I didn't summon you here so I could stare at you, or you at me. I asked you here so you could help me feel safe. I need to learn. So, get teaching. We have a much more limited time here.
Link finally turned to her and nodded.
Here's to the most awkward training session we will probably ever have, then.
He let out a deep breath and started fidgeting, moving from foot to foot.
Did you want to start on the floor, or would you rather I...
Trailing off, he bit his lip. Realizing what he was getting at, Zelda stared at her ceiling.
This is going to be difficult.
Yes. You can, do whatever you think works. You're the trainer.
Right. Okay, then. Do you want to...
He gestured to the floor, and goddess was he red.
Sure.
She laid down, and Link bent one knee down and the other over her. It took him a second, wiping his sweaty hands even though the fabric soaked most of it up for him. And then he was leaning over her, his hands on her wrists.
Yeah? I'm understanding why you didn't want us to do this during normal hours.
Yeah.
She exhaled a breath, watching Link's throat bob as he swallowed thickly, their breath caressing each other's face, his entire body tense and unsure. Goddess, she couldn't tell if this was her best idea or one of the worst she'd ever come up with. The urge to sit up and kiss him was strong. He was so close, and he was being so careful not to press his body against her. She could see the strain. Oh, this training was not going to go over well for one or both of them.
Dab dab. Links. Balls. Dab dab. Links. Balls. Dab 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 dab.
Speak.
Dab, 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 dab.
My fellow champion, we are in the sanctity of Dab Dab. Need you not speak in tongue of Dab. Now, I shall repeat thy request. Speak!
My lord, one of our champions has been slain by Kendar. The encounter truly resulted in our failure.
Her failure? Her failure? Need I remind you that we Dabs exist for one reason and one reason alone? Link's balls. And we will stop at nothing to claim them. For every pancake slain, 5 more take their place. Just look at some of our newest champions. We have Dap Dap the Man-Eater.
Dab 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 dab.
Dap Dap the JPEG. Tapsune Miku.
Dab dab dio.
We do not fear the one known as Kenlar. As a matter of fact, it seems our failed champion wants some retribution. You will not fail me again. Now! Hooray! Daptoramus! Dap Dap!
Dab dab.